Welcome back to the 12 Days of Innovation. I'm Charles. I'm here today with my good close personal friend, Heather. Today, we're going to talk about how to use AI to generate feedback for students. But before we do that, let's spend just a couple of minutes talking about why feedback is important.
Feedback's important for a lot of reasons. One being that it gives them those actionable steps to take so that they know exactly where they need to go or where they're already doing really well.
So a reason to use AI specifically for feedback is that it can be extremely timely so that the students are receiving that feedback when they need it. If you're providing feedback to the student the next day, or even worse, a week later, they've already moved on. They're not thinking about that assignment anymore. But if you could give them that actionable feedback immediately where they can go and make changes, they're much more likely to remember and to act on it. Another reason to use AI for providing feedback is that it can save teachers a ton of time. You're not going to have to necessarily spend all weekend grading.
It can also help you calibrate your own practices and have a thinking partner as you're working through grading assessments or giving feedback. But it's always really important that we're looking very closely at that feedback and making sure that it aligns to the standards and the rigor of what we're wanting kids to be able to do.
Exactly. You want to make sure that the feedback is matching how you would grade and not you're now trying to match the way that the AI is telling you you're supposed to grade. Let's take a look at a tool that we can use to provide feedback for students.
So there's a lot of great tools out there today that you can use to help with feedback, such as Brisk or Magic Student. But today we're going to look at Google's new tool, Notebook LM. Regardless of what tool you're using, the process that we're going to use will pretty much be the same, but we're just going to look at it through the lens of Notebook LM today.
Absolutely. So to start, the website is notebooklm.google.com, and we're going to create a new notebook. So the really cool thing about Notebook LM is that you can attach files that the AI will then use as context as we ask it to, in this case, generate feedback. So I've created a new notebook here, and I'm going to choose to upload a file. So the file that I'm uploading in this case is going to be the STAR 8th grade SCR rubric. The things that are included in this rubric are the passage that the students are reading, the scoring guideline with specific information about what is included in each of the different scoring criteria. The other thing that's very important when you're generating feedback is to provide example responses so that the AI understands this is what I'm looking for specifically. So in this case, a score point 0 would look something like this, or one of these other responses. A score point 1 is going to look more like these responses, and a score point 2 would look like these other responses. If you give the AI specific instructions and examples, it's much more likely to match what you're actually expecting because we're not asking it to make a bunch of assumptions anymore. So I'm going to add this file to my notebook, and it will now appear over here on the side panel. Right? Below that, I can give it a prompt, just like we would anywhere else. So in this case, the prompt I'm going to use is the following. Use the attached rubric to provide scoring feedback for the student constructed response. Your scores should only be based on the criteria contained in the rubric. Use the example responses to calibrate your scores. When providing feedback, I want you to provide scores for each criteria as well as an overall score. Provide additional information about the score on the line after the score. Here's the student response. By providing this information to the AI, it will now understand exactly how I want the feedback to be formatted and understand that I want it to not only generate feedback, I also want it to generate a score. So I'll paste in that prompt, and then below that, I'm going to enter in a sample student response so that we can see what type of feedback Notebook LM will generate for us. So in this case, the sample student response reads, "The judicial conference likely began to allow cameras in courtrooms so people could see that justice was being done. The passage states supporters of the program argued that the cameras would allow the public to see that justice was being served." To submit this, I'll click the Run button. And just like you would get from ChatGPT or any other AI bot, you'll receive a response. Let's take just a moment to look at the feedback that the AI has generated for us.
So as you can see here, it's generated a response for us that includes a score and gives notes about all of the criteria from the rubric. I also like that it provides some additional feedback that I can share with students about what they did well and where they can continue to grow. Even this student that scored well on this prompt is still giving feedback to grow even more.
Now let's take a look at a response that maybe doesn't score quite as well and what kind of feedback we could give those students. In this case, I have a response that likely would have scored a 0 if I had hand graded it. I'm going to use the same prompt, and let's see what kind of feedback the notebook will give us for this student.
So after scoring this response, we can see that it did align with the way we had scored it originally, which was at a 0. This time, instead of giving that praise, it's going to give a little bit more of what they can work on, even though we did see that in the other as well. I also like that in here, it sources back to the rubric that we fed to it. So it will go directly into telling us why it scored it at a 0 based on the information that we gave it to begin with.
So now that I have some feedback that I could share with students, I have a couple of options of how I get this feedback to the students themselves. One is I can click copy here to copy the text to the clipboard. From there, I could go to Canvas or to a Google Doc or wherever I'm giving the feedback and paste in that feedback. If I want to save this response, I click this Save to Note, and it will now save that as a note here in Notebook LM for this particular notebook. If I need to get back, I can click View Chat, and then I could continue to enter in more student responses. What could we do once we got all of our student feedbacks submitted?
So there's a lot of things that I would do once I got this information. The first would be definitely sharing it back to the students in some way. But I could also see taking all my kids that scored in certain ways and got similar feedback and pulling them into a small group so that I could work with them. Even if this is a summative assessment, I don't want them to just stay there. I want them to grow based on the feedback that I'm giving them for that assignment. So I would definitely pull small groups that way, or maybe just conference and workshop with an individual that I know needs that additional support based on the feedback that I've been given.
Absolutely. I think it's very important, though, that we make sure that this is not your final feedback. This is a starting point for you, the teacher, to look over it and decide, does this feedback make sense, or do I need to come in and tell the AI, recalibrate? This is not how I would have scored this particular response.
That's a really good point. Always make sure that we're following back up and that it aligns with how we would score it ourselves and based on those rubrics.
Jessica Cowan from Holiday Heights Elementary shared how she uses AI to generate feedback to improve her students' writing.
After our beginning of the year writing, I decided to see if ChatGPT could help me grade my beginning of the year writings since STAR is going towards that for grading. And so I put a PDF of the passage, the rubric, and the question into ChatGPT, and then I put one of my students' answers in there and asked it to grade it for me, and it was amazing. They gave me not only the grade, but they broke it down into each category of the rubric and according to each one. And then it gave me their strengths. And then if I were to improve that student's writing, it gave me exactly what I needed to work on with my students for that writing.
So let's review some of the best practices when generating feedback. One thing to always consider, and I wouldn't even say consider, I would say include, is make sure that we are including our TEKs, a detailed rubric, and leveled examples. Those leveled examples are going to be huge in making sure that the AI knows what you're looking for when scoring.
You wouldn't want it to grade a third grader's work the same way that it would grade a high school senior's work. So make sure that you're telling it, this is the level that I'm expecting for this feedback. Another important thing is to calibrate the feedback to how you would score, not the other way around. You're the expert in your classroom. Don't let the AI tell you this is how things need to be scored. You should evaluate the feedback. Determine, does this feedback match reality? Adjust the prompting if it's not giving you the sort of feedback that you're wanting it to.
And we want to use it as a support, not a replacement. Nothing can replace the teacher in the classroom. You're so valuable. But this can be a thinking partner for you or something just to calibrate and make sure that you're on the right track when you're scoring.
Remember, you're responsible for the final grade, not the AI. Our challenge for you today is to take an existing rubric for an assignment with example responses at various levels to use as context for the AI. Then use that rubric to score several student responses. If you don't have a rubric or student responses readily available, we'll provide an example on the 12 Days website. So things to think about while you're doing that. Think about how the feedback provided by the AI matches how you would have graded it yourself. Are there things that you agree with or that you disagree with? How could you maybe change the rubric or the prompt that you're giving the AI to make it match your expectations?
Thank you so much for joining us today, and be sure to check out more resources on the 12 Days website.
We'll see you tomorrow.